want to welcome everybody today to the IBIA and the Brain Injury Professional. I think we called it the Casual Chats. I figured my name is Katherine Snedaker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm also the CEO and founder of Pink Concussions. I had the great honor of being the guest editor for this current issue of Brain Injury Professional, and actually had the responsibility and the privilege to go out and invite different people to write articles. And most of the people are, I've gotten to know them over the years because they've supported our organizations and spoken at our events. And so in this series, which will be about 5 or 6 weeks, every week I'll invite on one of the authors in the Brain Injury Professional. And I would hold it up right now, but every single copy I have is gone. But it was in it was the cartoon looking one that came in your email. There's also a link to that. You can read it online at Brain Injury Professional, and there's a downloadable PDF. Today's topic, I have two wonderful people I will allow them to introduce themselves, and we're going to talk about traumatic brain injury and intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And the terms as we use them today, domestic violence, will be talking about violence in the family, including other than just the partner. And then when we refer to intimate partner violence, we're talking between two partners. So first, we thought we'd break it into quarters and for about 10 minutes talk about what these two researchers are doing right now, then spend the middle section talking about COVID and TBI and domestic violence, and then the final 10 minutes kind of what they saw for the future, and then have a Q&A. So welcome everybody, and without ado, I'll introduce our first speaker, Eve.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. With such limited time, I'm super thrilled that you came here. Thank you so much. Honestly, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. If you ever read my work or heard me speak, you kind of should know that by now. This is something that I've been working on I'm trying to understand for over 25 years now. And the sad news is there's nothing when I started working on this in terms of understanding or even recognizing that brain injury in women who'd experienced partner violence even existed. There was nothing at the time. And now, although there's not that much, that's kind of the sad news. The good news is I think we are headed in a really nice direction. We're gaining some traction finally. So I am an associate professor at Harvard and do my work at Massachusetts General Hospital. And I use neuroimaging, neuropsychological, and interview-based methods and blood, actually. Forgot, basically trying to get the whole shebang here. And anyway, to try to understand the relationship between what happens when a woman experiences a brain injury or repetitive brain injuries from her partners and how that relates to how she may feel later in terms of depression or anxiety or PTSD symptomatology, or if that's related to her ability to remember or learn or think in a clear and quick manner. So that's my primary objective here, and basically raising awareness. And as we talk more through this discussion, I'm sure I'll get to other things that I do, but that's the nutshell of what I do. And, one of the things I just always want people to be constantly thinking of is when we talk about this topic, I think sometimes, if, for example, if you're studying schizophrenia or something, you kind of know those are those people over there. It's a set of people. You may know somebody, or maybe you don't know anybody, but when we talk about women who have experienced partner violence, I guarantee you know somebody, even if you don't know it. And so I want you to think about that this is really, really close to home. This affects everybody and not just a few, not a little subset of the population. And hopefully when people feel that way, it will help them see just how relevant it is to their lives, and that we really need to speak to representatives and Congress or however we can to try to get this on the map better. So with that said, I will let Katherine let her, I guess Johnny can probably introduce himself, but I'll let Katherine do the guiding here.
Thanks, Eve. And I'm very lucky to have Eve as a good friend and a roommate in conferences when we go back to having conferences. We met at the National Institute of Health, where we were on a panel in a 2-day event on brain injury in women and domestic violence. And from that group, we have now grown from 4 of us that were on that panel. We've now grown to a task force that's over 240 people. So Eve, it's been a great ride. I can't believe how few years I've known you now. I think it was 2017, but I can't imagine my world without you. And now I'd like to give Jonathan a chance to introduce himself. Johnny?
Yeah, it's a pleasure here. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining us. There's new people joining every second. It's an honor to follow in Eve's footsteps in this field. I was trained as a neuroscientist and a neurotraumatologist, and have sort of re-envisioned my laboratory and the research that we do in these COVID times to be traumatic brain injury and social impact, because there is always the possibility of research developing new drugs and new vaccines. But to a large extent, what we're here to talk about is how the research and the information that we generate is going to change the mindset of our entire population and change our culture towards this topic. And that cultural change is only going to come through education, through awareness, and through data. And unfortunately, the data that we have are very limited. They are scattered. They are subsets of subsets of subsets of populations, basically wherever you can get access to these individuals, knowing that it is a poor representation of the reality. Eve said it really nicely when she said, you know somebody in this situation. It may not have occurred yesterday. It could have occurred 30 years ago, or it may occur tomorrow. And these, specifically at this time, with stresses on families' financial security, their job security, the isolation and the stresses, the increase in incidence and intensity of types of events keeps going up. That being said, we're very grateful that you're here just to hear more about it. There's only so much you can put into text. And just remember, we're a human species that like to be connected. We like to tell stories, and we like to motivate each other to do better.
That's a great introduction, Johnny. Thank you. What I saw this conversation is that us speaking in this way, that if you were at a conference and you grabbed your brown bag lunch and you sat down at a table and people introduced each other and started talking. And to segue to what's going on with COVID, Johnny, there's a unique opportunity right now with the whole world facing a crisis at the same time. And the same types of crises with lockdowns. And I went back and wrote a blog post. I think I probably wrote it around the end of April, but I went back, and the first domestic violence and COVID article was in China in English. And that was around the 3rd of March. And then I found the 4th and the 5th. And then you could literally trail COVID around the globe with behind it a week or two, a domestic violence article about the increase, the fear of the increase, how can you access resources right now in the time of COVID. So for so long, domestic violence was around a particular area, a particular subset, or a celebrity, or a particularly traumatic event, and it would go into the public consciousness and out the next minute. So this is a time where domestic violence articles are prevalent across, I think, all countries, and domestic violence hotlines are just included in the part of, I know, with New York press briefings. So Eve, what are you seeing up in Boston, and what are you seeing with COVID changing how you're working and what you're seeing in the environment?
I mean, I don't think that what I'm seeing necessarily in Boston is any different than anywhere else. I mean, I wrote a letter to the editor, way back in April, I guess, about the idea that medical professionals who may be seeing women, this is a great opportunity to not only, people were saying, oh, domestic violence is going up, right? Intimate partner violence is going up because, of course, you have, like you were saying, the economic stressors, the fear of what's going on, the fear of not having a job or not having a job. You can't go out and let off steam with your buddies anymore or get drunk in a bar. You're going to be home. You're going to be bringing alcohol home. And we know alcohol is highly related to incidences of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And then women can't get away. Women aren't going to work. Men aren't going to work. So there's just more time together. It's just sort of, as I described it, sort of two pandemics clash, COVID and partner violence. And whereas I think one of the things that we have been seeing in general, I know you asked specifically about Boston, but I'll just say, in general, what it seems to be is that, partner violence is going up, and there are lots of folks who are more aware of partner violence going up. But what I haven't seen that much of, in fact, I think there's only been maybe one article, maybe I think in Ohio, and I think Rachel Ramirez, she's one of our colleagues, and she's been influential in this work, where people have said, what, partner violence is going up, but let's make sure we're looking out for the head injuries, because if you can see the partner violence, and if you try to address the partner violence, this is a psychological stressor, this is horrible, and you try to get them an antidepressant or whatever it may be, you may not be addressing the issue if you're not recognizing that there may have been a brain injury that has occurred. And as Johnny was saying, our data in terms of the prevalence of brain injuries and what we know is very, very skimpy and not based on good large data sets or anything like that. I mean, I'm proud of the work I did and I stand by it, but I'll be the first to admit, my imaging studies are small studies. The study I did, looking at quote unquote these prevalence estimates is not a huge study. 99 women, that's 99 women. And it's a convenient sample, but nonetheless, no matter, we have a paper that we're actually putting that's under review now, but no matter how you look at it in general, what we see is that partner violence related brain injuries are high. I mean, even if they're 7%, that's a huge number when you consider that 1 in 3 women, or 1 in 4, depending on how you define the statistic or exactly what you're including, have experienced partner violence. So this is a really tremendously huge problem. We don't know the extent of the problem right now because we don't have good epidemiological data, but that's one of the things that Johnny and I and other colleagues, I think Kate Lawler, I think I saw her here, she's been on some of our conversations as well. And Rachel, we've sort of been trying to figure out how we're going to get, information on what is the real prevalence. I think the prevalence in general is high, and during COVID, it's going to be especially high for the reasons that Katherine was mentioning.
Rachel just put the link to that article up in the chat.
Eve, I wanted to step in and just say that we don't know what the prevalence is. I would say that the prevalence is going to be similar during COVID, but the intensity is going to go up. So, the number of individuals that are affected is going to be roughly the same, but the number of times or the intensity of those are going to go up. And if we just think about old caveman days where there's that image of clubbing a female and dragging them off by their hair, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about something that is, for whatever reason, part of our DNA, and we need to change this culture. And the conversations about LGBTQ rights and BIPOC rights and all those elements are critical to help change these mindsets. I found it fascinating that there's a term called a sun shower, which is when the sun is shining, but it's still raining. And if you start Googling what the history of this word sun shower is, it actually means that the devil is beating his wife with a stick. And so this is built into our folklore, and it is occurring all day, every day to individuals. And really what we want to point out is that For whatever reason, the attacks appear to be focused on the head, neck, and face. And the only rationale that I can come up with is that if somebody insults you, if you're just talking to them and they insult you and you want to have a physical reaction, it's more likely you're going to aim for their mouth because that's where the insult came from. And perhaps that's why the head is a target. But we're not entirely sure. But without a doubt, when you look at the data, it's in the high 80s or low 90s in terms of the percentage of individuals who experience physical assault as a result of domestic or intimate partner violence that have head injury symptoms. And so it is all over the place, and we just need to bring it out into the light.
Thank you, Johnny. And I did notice that on the registration, someone was asking about screening tools. And I know there are a number of research projects right now trying to decide which tool is best for which population. Does it necessarily work for women of color or women of a certain ethnic area or all the subgroups we've talked about? But do you guys want to chime in there about if you're actually working in a shelter right now, some of the screening tools that might be helpful to somebody that is in a shelter?
The first part, Katherine, that you wanted to reiterate is the fact that, what is the subgroup? And in our experience of reading the literature and gathering data, there are no subgroups per se. This happens across age, it happens across race and socioeconomic status. So we definitely need to be aware that if somebody indicates that they may have been in an abusive relationship, that head injury is high. The tools that are available, the first one that is widely implemented is called the HELPS tool. It's a 5-question, almost retrospective guiding a conversation tool about, do you remember being hit in the head? Do you remember losing consciousness? Have you ever been to the emergency room for a head-related injury? It's a very useful high-level screening tool, but it's not going to get to the post-concussive symptoms that may be enduring. And where we see a huge challenge is the fact that many individuals, both on the provider and on the patient side, don't have the terminology to know what neurological symptoms of traumatic brain injury might be. So when an individual is bad at math, it may be because for their entire life they've been told they're bad at math, when in fact there's an organic reason for that concept. So describing what norms are, such as normal people or people who have full capacity of their brain should be able to do simple addition or balance their checkbook. If you can't do this, perhaps we need to look into it more. And that comes out of conversation between providers and patients.
Eve, would you like
so
to
just to
discuss the
follow
tools
up
you're
on,
using?
I'm sorry, Katherine, did you want to say something?
I said, do you want to discuss the tools that you're using in your research?
Oh, so yeah, so exactly. So what I use in my research, I actually think is sort of what I was going to say. I mean, addressing one of the things that Johnny spoke about is that people don't necessarily have the nomenclature or don't necessarily understand what it is they're even looking for. So if you're, say you're somebody who is working at a shelter, you may not know what a brain injury is or how to ask about it. And likewise, a woman, if you say, have you ever had a brain injury to a woman, she may not know what that means or what a concussion is. And so what I do and what I've done in my research is, and it's just, I find it to be, I have found it to be useful, and it seems to give me the information I want, is literally just asking, after anything your partner ever did to you, did you ever lose consciousness or black out? And then if it's some type of external trauma to the head or some type of, basically something that causes acceleration, deceleration, or strong forces in the brain that may affect the brain, then that's a brain injury. That's at least a concussion or a brain injury. And then if they've also but it's not just that. In fact, most brain injuries do not result in loss of consciousness. But if you say after anything your partner ever did you ever have a memory gap for part of that situation where you just kind of like, what just happened? How did I get here? And it's because maybe they were in a fight, and maybe the last thing they remember was maybe getting hit or strangled. Strangulation may result in an acquired brain injury, and that hit may have resulted in post-traumatic amnesia. So right there, that's a brain injury. You don't need any more. And so there's just literally a series of like 5 questions that I ask, and it basically revolves around asking about if their partner has done anything to them that resulted in an alteration in consciousness. And I could go into the details here, but we don't really have the time for me to go through every one of them. But the point is it's not necessarily that hard. It could be done, I think, in 5 minutes or less. And I think it's a pretty useful way to get at the information. Now, it hasn't been validated. So in that regard, this isn't some measure that I'm, going to try to post and say everyone has to use this or should use this. It has worked very well for me, I think, in getting the information that I need, and others have used it and has also worked for them. So I like that. But that said, I think what we really need is a validated measure specifically focused on women who have experienced partner violence, because we don't have anything yet. The HELPS has been modified to include questions about partner violence, but it's still not really specific, really the way that I would like it to be, just adding those questions. So really that's something that we need to get done. And I would love to see that happen. Anybody who knows sort of about validating questionnaires and stuff, I'd be happy to work with you on this, because we definitely need something like this. And obviously the shorter it can be, the better, because no one wants to throw in an extra even 1 minute or 50 seconds or 30 seconds into their work. But what with respect to screening, the way I try to sell it, or the way, not even just screening, but just understanding it, especially for people who are overwhelmed in a shelter or something like that, is with these 5 minutes, you may save yourself days or hours of time down the road, because if you overlook the fact that this person has sustained a brain injury, you may be telling her to do all these things, and then she comes back, and now you have to tell her all over again. And now I have to tell her over again. And then a week later, you're like, well, we just don't think you're a good fit for our shelter here, because she hasn't been following the rules, et cetera. And it may be that, well, yeah, because she's just sustained a brain injury and you're throwing all this stuff at her and she can't get it. It's like, telling someone on the football field after they've been knocked out that they have to get an order of protection, that they have to look for work, and they have to get their kids in school. You think he's going to do that, in a week? No. So I think there's just, I think that we need to convince people that this is a worthwhile thing to look for, and then it will be worth their time, and it ultimately will help everybody in the long run. But we really need to get a measure that is validated and we know really works to get at what we want.
And Eve, I always enjoy the optimism that you present. However, that I can wear the devil's advocate hat very well. And we need to point out the fact that the reasons to withhold information on the part of the participant are astronomical. Mm-hmm. Typically, there's financial withholding that they are concerned about. There are issues about custody of their children or ability to serve as a parent. There's issues potentially about retirement or employment, social status, pets and dogs, and access to medication and healthcare providers. And all of these reasons are compounded when it comes time to respond to a survey or a validated tool. And building that trust is critical. Where we found success in Phoenix is engaging the participants with a healthcare navigator who has some social work training. And this is where Katherine Snedaker's expertise comes in as well, is building that trust and knowing that there's essentially a chief of staff for this participant to take care of that order of protection, to follow through on all the documentation, just to help them rest and recover, to be able to seek the help that they need. And that help includes social and medical services.
What about the fear of a worker who suspects a brain injury, but thinking, wow, this person Right? There be male or female, is already struggling with so much. Why would I raise my hand and try to get them screened for a brain injury? Do they already have enough to deal with?
That's such an important question. So one of the issues we ran into right at the get-go is if a participant wants to show up at a shelter, usually they are handed a stack of paperwork to fill out or read or consent to. And one of the participants we were talking to was, well, I remember when I came in, I was seeing double, likely because they had a head injury and they had some vision issues. So if a patient or if a participant can't even read the document, who cares what's on the document? And you really have to start from basic principles, asking what is it you're comfortable being able to do, and be able to give them time to get access to that or to engage and even consent to whatever services are being provided. So we would like to make sure that they can read, they can walk and balance without risk of additional falling, that they're able to take care of their activities of daily living. And for the majority of these individuals, they'll pass all of those queries within 5 minutes, and you don't have to be concerned, but definitely build from the bottom up is important.
I think that's very clear. Eve, what's your take on, why tell somebody that's already so down with everything else in life, why even explore the brain injury piece?
Well, because if you don't, I think you're just going to slow down the process of recovery. I mean, it's very hard to fix something if you don't know what's broken. So I think there's some people who may be like, well, if we don't know exactly what to do, then maybe we shouldn't tell someone, because I'm sure. No. Women deserve to know, anyone for that matter, men, we speak of women, but we all know this happens to men as well. Just they're not, we could talk for a while about that. Women are disproportionately affected. We'll just leave it at that. But they deserve to know what the situation is. And it doesn't mean that someone is incapable or, unfit is a word that I like to use a lot. There's nothing saying that someone is unfit. It's saying, yeah, wow. It's just like if someone had a broken arm and you're like, well, I don't want to tell her she has a broken arm because then maybe she can't drive her car well. So you're just going to let her drive her car into a tree then? It's the same thing. Why is this any different? If you have a broken brain, why are you not going to tell them they have a broken brain? Right. And you don't have to speak about it that way. You don't necessarily try to scare them. But the brain is just, it's if you think of your body as like anything below the head, is thing, and different things can break and it still functions, right? It's just not perfect. Anything above the head, something in there can break. It's not totally broken. It still works. It's just not perfect. And what's going to be imperfect is what you have to figure out. What's going on? What part of the brain, is affected, or what are the things you're having problems with because of that? So if you ignore the fact that somebody has a brain injury and they just think, well, yeah, my partner says I'm really stupid all the time, and yeah, I am. I mean, I can never get anything done. Whatever. Now I have a brain injury. So it's like, wait a minute, wait. If you have a brain injury, no, you're not stupid now. You're probably never stupid. But if you have a brain injury, you're not stupid. Now you have a reason to think about, oh, okay, and how did I get this brain injury? He gave it to me. So he's gaslighting and, trying to make you think that you're, the worst thing and you can't survive without him. And if she really has brain injuries, she may very well be more likely to believe him and be in a less safe position, less likely to get out of that relationship if she chooses to do so, because that's not always the goal, but certainly less likely to keep herself and her children safe if she has a brain injury and you don't tell her. So for me, it's kind of a, pardon the pun, but no brainer. I think we need to do it in a very careful way, so we don't just traumatize her and let her go running into the wind like, oh no, I have one more problem. You need to go a second step and say, but this is good because now we know, and now we have something to work with, and then you kind of go from there.
I think that's very well said. And I would say, and this is based on anecdotally working with women, that the word that I come up with is relief. There's a sense of relief because it's not like the person hasn't been struggling with stuff, you know, and it's, you're in a paper bag, you're struggling to get out, and then suddenly there's a name and there's like, here's what it is. And getting resources, it's not like these are NFL players and we're going to zip them over to the MRI machine and they're going to go to the neurocognitive person and get everything done. I mean, there are real limits to the resources, especially during COVID. But I think even naming it, naming brain injury, and just so, and then we'll go to questions. I also, and I know Eve feels this way, very careful about jumping from brain injury to CTE. And I see Stephen Casper's on here, who has an incredible paper I'm always recommending people read, and it's The Boxer and the Punch Drunk Wife, to look back at the research. And the research isn't there yet for domestic violence and CTE. And that CTE space is terrifying because there's really not a lot to do there. So if we can stick to the brain injury and the cognitive and rehab, a lot of the stuff, if you look up for ADD, a lot of the strategies around ADD, about parsing 20 minutes rather than a 1 hour session, getting a text reminder, these things that help with other issues with ADD and learning disabilities can help, where if we say, all right, let's jump to CTE, we're in a really scary, dark place. And we have some questions. Anything you want to say, Johnny, to finish off that, and then I'll read some of the questions?
I think we should get to the questions because so many people were generous with their time.
Okay. Now I have to read. These are put reading glasses on. Currently, there are 27 states that have been funded by the ACL in traumatic brain injury. Many states have been screened for TBI, and some have data, although limited, around IPV. Can you provide some ideas for work that still needs to be done in that area that states could consider under a new funding opportunity?
Funding to understand IPV related TBI. I mean, honestly, I wish I knew it better. I mean, I don't know politics that much, but however you get money, I mean, I think the more people who speak up about this and say, this is an important issue, we need more resources allocated to this. I know our current, government administration, at the federal level has not been as friendly to this type of problem, and I think has limited resources. But I think if we put pressure on people when they're going to, need to be voted and say, these are topics that we need funding for, I would say, I mean, I don't know that much about how that works, but that seems to be one of the ways that I think we should do it. And just basically saying, this isn't just for a certain segment of the population, because I think some people think, oh, well, that only happens to some people, this isn't that important. No, I mean, and this is what I was getting at the beginning. And what Johnny echoed is that this is, this is pervasive. It's huge. And, this is not just going to address a few people. This is all over. So
I love it when
maybe you have better ideas.
No, not better ideas, just more of a call to action. I love it when someone rolls out a soapbox for me to jump on and continue to do parkour from social issue to social issue. That being said, one issue is that, and it's come up in many of the comments in the chat, if we go to the Department of Justice and say, hey, can we have funding for the intersection of traumatic brain injury and intimate partner violence, they'll say, no, please go to the women's, the Department for Women's Health. And then you go to them and they say, no, go to the neurological disorders condition, because this is something new and at the intersection, and everyone that we approach for funding wants to try to push that funding into another person's purse string, so to speak. I also personally think that legislators are going to be unwilling to create a floodgate of money in this domain, because many of our male legislators and lawmakers are likely holding in their closet the fact that they may have been perpetrators of this type of violence, and they don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to turn that light on in the closet. That's my own personal conception of how law and legal aspects occur, but we can't let that stop us, and we have to continue to raise awareness. We are grateful that a couple senators asked the Government Accountability Office to look into this topic. and the Government Accountability Office did fund a 1-year sort of investigation and the generation of a report. The outcome of the report that went to Congress said, this is an important issue. We need more data. Likely we need more funding. And then COVID happened and we haven't seen much traction along those lines. If you ever have an opportunity to speak to those who may be able to sway where money goes, this money can support education of judges, education of prosecutors, education of police officers, forensic nurses, social workers, even beauticians, real estate agents, and pharmacists to help to recognize this work, as well as the foundational epidemiology, neuroimaging, and neuroscience work that's required. So that's one of my soapboxes.
It's a good soapbox. I do know it was in France. I'm pretty sure it was France where they incorporated into all the pharmacies a code sentence. If a woman came in to get a prescription and it said a particular sentence, that the pharmacist would know that she was in danger in her own home. So she could say this sentence. He would have her information there because she was filling out the form. And that was a perfect connection point for someone then to go check on her. And I do think that we need to create that structure. It was exciting to be a part of that report. And we were really hoping that something would come and then COVID hit, but that report may be lodged in a really great position when we're on the backside of COVID and can work on that. Barbara Winters asked, are there studies on individuals who are involved with the justice system and cross-section of domestic violence who have brain injury? And then Stephen Casper answered, there's extensive literature on IPV in the justice system, but I'm practically aware of no writing on IPV, brain injury, and the justice system. And I put down a little 235, a link to our task force calls, and the April call this year, April, Stephen Casper and Kelly O'Donnell gave a great presentation. Their slides are there and quick notes, just talking about the history of this. And it's really important. You can't really understand where we are now unless you look at the history behind this and how pain and but women coming into a doctor with pain have always been translated as mental, and that, you know, if you come in and you're depressed and you're frightened or whatever, or you're in pain, it's obviously mental illness because you're a woman. And in general, looked at men as physical issues. And I think mental issues are missed in men oftentimes. And then only then with the women, after they've ruled out the mental thing, do they look for physical damage or physical injuries. So trying to shift that perspective around with the gender differences. The other subgroup that I did want to talk about are women of color. And if your protection in your neighborhood is calling in the police, yet the police in your neighborhood are somebody that you believe could put your family members in threat of death, who do you call in those situations? We have a really great call that Monique Papalopoulos did on being a woman of color, and even down to the fact that the bruises on your skin are going to show up less because of the skin tone that you have. And, you know, how are we aware of different cultural differences in those communities when we come in to help, and how can that help be perceived? So, and as a white woman of privilege, that's not something that I can speak to, and have to turn to experts who have studied it and are women of color. So I do want to put that out there.
And Katherine, just to another, I mean, this as somebody, it's a group that we're actually starting to be interested in. Our lab is trans women, because I mean, one thing that we know is that there are higher rates of partner violence in transgender relationships, and there's virtually nothing, you know, on head injuries or anything like that. So that's being, I think, like 100% overlooked. And so something as simple as understanding that, you know, just recognizing that, wow, this is probably even a bigger problem in this subset of folks, based on what we know about just basic partner violence. And so Johnny was 100% right. that this happens everywhere. And unfortunately, the more marginalized folks in our society are disproportionately affected. And we have to recognize that, and we should recognize that, while at the same time saying, this is important. We have to recognize everybody, but there are some folks we really want to make sure don't get left out because they're not so mainstream, or they're not as easy to study.
I want to go back just for a second and talk about the criminal justice system. And I know there was an article, it was more of a newspaper article that came out 3 or 4 years ago. And there was a woman who was put into jail and her kids taken away because she kept missing court dates. And it was very clear that this was due to intimate partner violence that likely involved brain injury, which challenged that person's ability to organize their schedule and be able to make those court dates. So the comments that are in the chat with regards to the criminal justice system, law enforcement, brain injury, and intimate partner violence, they are still 3 different worlds that have not yet come to understand that there are links associated with it. One of the challenges one of the opportunities for change that we found working with police officers is once they understood the relationship between a football player on the field who can't remember the last play, where they're playing, or their team's name, so to speak, is similar to when they show up at a domestic assault call and one of the partners is mumbling and sounds like they're lying and confusing everything and not telling the truth and trying to game the system. When they put it in the context of, oh, a head injury means you can't remember the score, therefore intimate partner violence might mean that my story sounds a little jumbled, it gave them clarity. And that's why the education and the awareness is so critical to move forward with all our different contact points in this topic.
Well, unfortunately, we have 3 minutes left. I knew that we could talk for 4 hours, but we wanted to give this a short little piece. And then I want to give both Eve and Johnny a sort of minute to wrap up. And then their articles are in the Brain Injury Professional magazine that's free. That's online. You can download it. You download a PDF, and that's brought to you by Brain Injury Professional and NABIS. Eve, Jonathan, each have about a minute and a half to conclude. So hard.
Eve always goes in front of me. She always wins first place to my second place. So go.
So then you go first, Johnny.
Oh, then I got to go first, so you can go last. If this is your first time learning or hearing about intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injury, welcome. Reach out. There is such a community of individuals that are willing to grow their teams and learn more expertise. Literally just yesterday, I learned about how real estate agents who are not just selling houses, but also managing properties can benefit in this particular domain. And that just opens up a whole new world for us to understand how we can bring people in. If you've been working at this topic for the last set of years and you feel alone, thank you for all the work you've done, and we're so grateful for that work, and we want to let you know that the community is here to support you, and no question, or every question is on the table to be addressed and to be answered because so little is out there. And so I just want to say thank you for your time and keep educating and advocating for these topics. Go for it, Eve.
Thank you, Johnny. And so what I'd like to say is again, to any of you, especially if you're new, welcome. And I hope you've learned at least something, and certainly feel free to reach out if you want to learn more. And, I am doing this research. I mean, I'm doing virtual studies. So if someone wants to participate, we're doing some stuff that's 100% online. You can come from wherever if you're interested in that. And part of what we're doing there is really trying to get a sense a little bit more of a prevalence from just a more, it's not really epidemiology per se, but just a perspective where people can just call in from wherever, and we're trying to get some better numbers. We're not focusing on just locally. We got the shelters, and then we got some people who aren't in shelters, but it's the Boston area. So anyway, so feel free. This isn't necessarily a pitch to get more subjects or anything. It just occurred to me. But yeah, anyone can join if you have a computer. Anyone can be a participant, and there is compensation. But because that's part of what our objective is, really to figure out the extent of this problem. And I mean, we know it's bad, but we want to have the numbers that we can back it up, so that then when we try to get funding from NIH or whoever else, that you say, here are the data. We have data that shows this is a huge problem. No matter how you look at it, it's not just shelters. And so that's part of what we're doing. And then the other thing is I just, I'm not entirely sure where do you go. I mean, I would say that education system, we should absolutely, I focus my work largely on understanding what has happened once all of these bad things have already occurred. And I really also am trying to gear part of my efforts now towards, okay, how do we make it so we don't have to get here? And I'm not so delusional that I think we're not going to have partner violence. But I do think that things can help. And I think that education in grade school about relationships and healthy relationships can go such a long way. We have so many classes that we take, and I'm not going to say they're not worth it or they're not good or whatever, but that people may never use in their lives. And relationships are always of use, and we need them, and we need understandings. I mean, people don't always have the right social supports or whatever in their lives, that they get a good example of healthy relationships. And so, I mean, it sounds maybe a little crazy, but I think we need to start teaching our kids in school in a very structured format what is healthy and what is not, and what is acceptable and what is not. For a woman not to understand that it's not okay for someone to kind of push her around a little bit, that's not acceptable. And for a guy to think, oh no, it's so, like as Sean Connery said, if a woman doesn't shut up, basically, if a woman doesn't shut up once I've told her it's enough, it's okay to slap her in the face. He literally says that, and he stands by it until he died. But he's a prominent figure. The point is that should not even be able to stand. Once somebody says something like that, they should be out of that business, because it's just so horrific. But unfortunately, right now, our tolerance for abuse towards women is, we kind of tolerate it. We tolerate it a lot. And I think it's because we are not being taught and that this is as bad as it really is. And we're not understanding the extent of the dangers. Is just tearing apart families and our countries, and just basically contributing to so much more damage than we ever realize. Yeah. So that's my soapbox. And thank you so much for tuning in. Really, really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. This is my passion, and I mean, it's not easy, but we're gonna make a difference.
Thank you, Eve. And we do want to acknowledge that men and boys do experience domestic violence and apartment violence. The trans community, people of color, and there is no one size fits all, but to a solution, but to keep working at it. And I, like Johnny, like calls to action. And now that we've had you all on the phone, you can't assume, if you're from a brain injury background, and this is your first look at domestic violence, or the other way is you worked in domestic violence your entire life and have not looked at the brain injury side of it. The whole idea of our task force and our friendships and our meetings together is to really bring those silos together. So please don't feel intimidated if any of this side of the topic or all of it is new to you. Reach out and be a part of the groups that we have going, read the articles in the magazine, and bring up the topic when you're in one of those silos. It's that cross-pollination makes us so much stronger. So I want to thank everybody. Stay safe out there. Thanks for joining us today. Monica, did you want to say anything? You're good? Okay.
How about see you in 2 weeks for the next one?
Yes. So we'll keep on this series. We'll keep doing this and having conversations that kind of basically walk us through this issue of women versus brain injury. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye-bye.